All right, guys. So Wold is a company, or basically like a sub company from GeekFly. And GeekFly, if you followed this channel, has pretty much made some of the more higher end true wireless earbuds that we've tested this year. But I don't know if Wold is like the IEM branch, the more wired branch. So the pair that we're going to check out today, which is the Wold GK260, it's a wired IEM that is using 12 drivers in each IEM, and it's also using a 5-way crossover system so that none of that overlaps each other, and you get all of this for under $200. I've seen the price kind of fluctuate between $185 to $195. In fact, there's two different options you can buy on these, which we'll talk about that in just a second. But we're gonna go ahead and just kind of jump into the look and the design of these. I'll start with the packaging, because in typical Wold fashion, it comes in a pretty nice like pleather box. It is pretty big. You can see on the back there's like a little metal plate here, and this is what just kind of shows the specs of the IEM itself. Everything that's in here is pretty clean. The overall design of the IEMs itself, it is a 3D resin printed design. It's a mixture of blue and purple on the outside. It's kind of like a brownish, maybe like almost copper material in the part that actually goes in your ear. And you can see some of the internals of the IEM itself. But the outside, again, majority of it is purple. The interesting thing about this is the cable on here is green. So when you mix the purple and the green, it kind of feels like these have like a Joker theme to them, which I'm actually a huge fan of this. But the drivers that they're using in here is they're using 4 balanced armature drivers, 4 piezoelectric drivers, 2 planar drivers, and then 2 dynamic drivers. So that is a lot to cram in one IEM. And once we get to the sound, you'll kind of see how interesting of a mix this is and what it really means when it comes to the sound, or what it's doing to the sound. Other than that, what they've included in the box is a pleather style. I always like to call this like an envelope style, just because it opens up from the front. It is a magnet connection. It's allowing you to house the IEMs and the cable itself. They are giving you 3 different style of silicone ear tips, so you're getting small, medium, and large in each one of those styles. Definitely make sure that you go around and try each one of these, because it does affect the sound quality. The cable that they've included is a 4-strand 8-core coaxial cable. It is using the 2-pin connection, which I've always said this is like the most common when it comes to IEMs. And then the end that plugs into whatever you're using, the one that I have is a 4.4 millimeter balance plug-in. Now this is where I said they have 2 different variations, because you can also buy a bundle that includes a 3.5 millimeter adapter, and that's the more standard jack. That's the one that's gonna, plug straight into laptops or straight into phones that may have a headphone jack. So it may kind of just come down to what you use. But I use these with my FIO K11 at my desktop. It has a balance plug-in, so the 4.4 millimeter balance plug-in was perfect. I didn't really need the 3.5 millimeter, but I still always like to have that option anyway. And honestly, on the site, if you're going to get the bundle with the 3.5 millimeter adapter, it's only like a $5 difference. So it might be just worth the $5 just to go ahead and have it included. And you're still going to be under that $200 price tag. Now, as far as actually using these with an amp, the impedance level is 20 ohms. They do have a sensitivity level of 112 decibels. So it's not really, again, necessary to use an amp to get some decent volume. But if you definitely want to take advantage of all the drivers they're using, getting the most out of the lows, the mids, and the highs, you're definitely going to want to use these with an amp or a DAC. And again, I use the FIO K11. This is a very inexpensive desktop amp, and it was more than enough to push these to their potential. And this is where we're going to go ahead and jump into the sound. And this is where, to me, it gets very interesting, because the Wold IEMs that I've tested recently or tested in the past, a lot of them are pretty mid to treble focus. A lot of details, a lot of clarity. And then usually when it comes to the low end, everything's tightened up. And this one's a little bit different, especially when it comes to the low end, because they didn't try to tighten up anything. If you are a bass head and you are looking for a pair of IEMs, I would kind of point you in the direction of these first. This is definitely a boomy bass. I would even say at times, depending on what you're listening to, it can come across as being a little over bloated. Now, there was no distortion or anything like that. You could just tell that they weren't really trying to do anything to tighten it up. They want you to be able to feel the impact of bass. And I would actually kind of throw these into the category of the Eco OH1s and the OH10s, which I always use as a reference when it comes to IEMs for bass. So the GK260s are no slouch when it comes to the low end. But I do want to say, though, having bass like that kind of makes you feel a little more isolated, a little more closed in. So these don't sound as open as a lot of the other IEMs that I've tested recently. Luckily, it still does a good job of being able to tell where everything's coming from, because when it comes to the mids and the treble, the mids kind of just sit right there with the rest of the mix. I wouldn't say this is as upfront as some of the other ones that we've tested, but still, whether it be male or female vocalists, I didn't have any issue being able to hear them. Acoustic and electric guitars still have really nice presence. It's just not as upfront. So again, just kind of expect it to blend in with the bass and the drums and everything else. It's just, again, it kind of gives it more of a studio type feel instead of being live at a concert. Everything just feels a little bit more intimate. That's kind of the vibe that I got with these. And then when it comes to the treble on these are nice and bright, and at times can be very bright. I noticed, especially if I listen to it at a little bit louder volumes, it can even have that sibilant sound with S's. And I kind of think in a way this is necessary when you're going to have bass the way that the GK260s have. You need something that's going to be able to counterbalance that, because it can't all be, geared towards the low end, or everything else is going to sound fairly flat or going to sound fairly dull. And luckily, treble is not falling into that category. It's very bright, definitely holds its own with the bass, and it's just overall going to give you this really dynamic tuning. So with saying that, my overall opinion on these is I'm going to say that these aren't going to be for everybody. I wouldn't use these as like to studio monitor, mixing or anything like that. I would maybe not even use these as like a musician on stage. I genuinely think that these are geared towards just listening to your music for fun, sitting at home like plugged into your amp, or even on the go. It is a dynamically tuned IEM that's not really trying to sound neutral. It's not trying to sound flat. Everything is pretty well colored except for the mids. I think the mids are the one area they just said, let's just leave these alone, but as long as everybody's getting the right amount of detail. So it's a fun IEM. And if that's what you're looking for, and if you're looking for an IEM that can give you probably some of the most bass that I've heard, that is definitely where the GK260s stand out. With the amount of drivers that they have and the crossover system that they're using, it's not a muddy mess. It's just a fun IEM to listen to, and at under $200, I can definitely recommend them. But if you are interested in checking these out, I will have them linked in the description. But guys, that wraps up my video on the Wold GK260s. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Thank you so much for checking out all the other videos. And as always, make sure to stay tuned for more.